Well, as the war in Ukraine continues, Russian forces are reportedly moving into the east now and gaining forces in one region there. Professor Bradley Woodworth from the University of New Haven is here for more on the latest developments out of Ukraine. Professor, thank you for your time today. Now tell us, have they secured Mariupol like the Russian forces are saying that they have?
So these are developments that have just taken place over the last couple hours. And I know that the city of Mariupol had been held by Ukrainian forces that were still managing to hold out. The last that I know, still tens of thousands of people there were on their last resources of food and water. So I know the situation there is really quite dire.
Okay, now what are we seeing in regards to when we're talking about war crimes committed in Russia? I really want to talk about the atrocities that have been committed here against innocent civilians. Where does punishment come from in regards to punishing Russian leadership here?
Well, first off, the Russian leadership is not under the control of the international community. And it will be up to the Russian people eventually to decide where they're going to take their country and what will happen to the Russian leadership after. Well, again, we're assuming that this war is going to end against the interests of Vladimir Putin and his regime. And I certainly hope that, and probably most of the people watching your show hope that, but this has not yet happened. And certainly my emphasis and my attention is on any way that we can end the continuing murders of individuals and indeed the committing of these war crimes.
I mean, I guess the biggest thing goes back here is trust, isn't it? And Russia says they won't do something and then they do it anyway. So, and history speaks for that. We look back to Crimea as well and what they did there. I mean, the Kremlin justifies their actions now in Ukraine by saying they're protecting their borders against NATO expansion there. But how is this relevant when already Latvia and Estonia are already part of that alliance? Is this just a fake justification here?
Yeah, well, we're asking to get into the mind of Vladimir Putin, and that's probably a little bit difficult. We know already from several years that back that Putin has been really very upset at the increasing role that NATO played throughout areas of the former Soviet Union, not only of the Baltic region, which in the early 2000s became part of NATO, but all of those states that had been part of the Warsaw Pact becoming members of NATO. In 2007 already, Putin made a very noteworthy speech in Munich in 2007, in which he accused the West of taking advantage of Russia, the expansion of NATO. So we know he's been upset for a number of years. I don't think even many experts were aware that he would he'd actually carry out these threats to kill people rather than simply using the threat of military action as a stick.
I mean, the West is imposing severe sanctions on Russia and it's impacting mainly everyday Russian people. Is that the right move here? Is that the ethical move from the West to be punishing the Russian people like this? I mean, how do the people of Russia feel now? And given history there in Russia as well.
Well, first off, I think that the Russian people, like citizenries in many countries, are diverse. Not everyone has the same view. Among educated people in the capitals, if people who visit from Western countries to Russia probably will come into contact with people who are, if not openly then at least in a hidden way, very much against what the regime is doing. So the Russian people aren't. I would say that even though we see reports of very high levels of support for Putin, I think these should be taken with an enormous grain of salt. We just don't know the veracity of them. As to the efficacy of the sanctions, certainly the West must express in every way it can its opposition to what Putin is doing, short of actually carrying out war against the Russian Federation.
I wanted to speak to you about the recovery of Ukraine. It doesn't seem to be being discussed so much at the moment. I think at the moment it's basic survival is where the discussion is at. But Ukraine has been destroyed to smithereens. Some of the images that we're seeing out of their buildings destroyed like never seen before. What does that recovery of Ukraine actually look like? Where does that begin from? Where does that even start from? I mean, children at the moment have fled, are missing out on schools. Schools are going to have to be rebuilt. Hospitals, education, it goes on, it flows on. It's been so destroyed here. What does that recovery process even look like? And I guess who pays for that too?
Yeah, we'll probably be looking at a 21st century Marshall Plan, right? The plan that was carried out in Europe after World War II. We'd like to hope that the Russian Federation will be able to, or whatever the state is of Russia after the end of the Putin regime, it might not even be the same political system that, or it certainly won't be the same political system, but it might not be the state under the same name right after this war is over. You'd expect that Russia, its successor state, will pay for much of it, but I suspect that it will be Western, the West, the very people that whose influence Putin wanted to diminish in Ukraine. The very things that Putin has been saying that he wants to see now for over 10 years in Ukraine, lowering Western levels of influence, bringing Ukrainians more firmly, or bringing them back into some sort of all-Russian sphere of influence. His war is going to actually achieve the very things he wanted most to avoid.
Now, you were a journalist during the period when the USSR collapsed. What was that experience like for you?
It was life-changing. I lived in Estonia, then it was the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic for the last year and a half of its existence. It was a period in which it was Gorbachev's perestroika period. That is, there's a time of real hope for change, right? That the people of the Soviet Union, Russians and non-Russians alike, were going to move away from a state that was controlled by the Soviet by the Communist Party. Gorbachev didn't want the country to divide, but unlike Putin, he wasn't willing to kill people. Yes, it's true that there were some outbreaks of violence that we could label as responsible to the Communist Party. 13 people died in Vilnius in January 1991. But Gorbachev made it clear to the communist leaders of Eastern Europe and to communist leaders throughout the Soviet Union, he was not going to bring in tanks. He was not going to do these kinds of things that we see Vladimir Putin doing. So for me, that sense of change, of belief in a better future, struck with me very, very deeply, and it's now being shaken by what the Russian state is doing. That is certainly true.
Yeah, and now we're here.
It seems unthinkable. What is happening now.
Definitely does. Bradley, thank you so much for your time, Professor. I really appreciate it.
Certainly, it's my pleasure.